Good morning. Thank you. I'm Sally Agostino. I'm an associate pastor here at New Hope Baptist, and welcome to those online. This morning we are finishing off our series in Revelation, as Lance has said to us, and oh, what a wild ride it has been. If you've been here for part or all of this series, you will know that we have seen images and symbols. We have unpacked and tried to discern and understand what was going on in the first century and what's going on today and what will go on in the future. We've seen beasts and dragons and harlots and bloodshed and bowls of judgment, and then finally the empire is completely defeated. Anything that is against God is completely defeated, and we find ourselves in this quiet, still moment in chapters 21 and 22. This is the end. This is the finale. This is the crescendo. This is the exciting bit. They were all exciting bits, let's be honest, even when we didn't understand them. And don't get me wrong, there will be parts of this we do not understand, because not everything is unveiled yet. This is an unveiling, this is apocalyptic literature, but it's not quite revealed in full, and we know that just by our questions. Jesus said, "Behold, I am making all things new." This is what's said in chapter 21. Behold, I am making all things new. I want to unpack a little bit of what that means for us this morning, what it meant in the first century, what it means for us today, and what it might mean in the future. So to finish off this series, I feel as though we need to go back to the start, but not the start of Revelation, the start, the Genesis 1 start, the creation part. Now, don't worry, we're not going to be here till midday. There is an 11 o'clock service, so it's all good. But I do want to just briefly glimpse the beauty of that creation as we see it in Genesis 1. We see a tree of life. We see peace. We see God walking in the cool of the day, one of my favourite phrases in the Bible. God walking in the cool of the day. He could come to Melbourne. There's plenty of cool in our day. And what we see, got to have a prop, right? What we see, and I give full credit to Hannah Freeman here, she did this with hoops. I am not that agile, my friends, so I have done it with little embroidery things. What we see in Genesis 1 is heaven and earth in sync, completely overlapping, completely in sync. Heaven and earth completely together, completely working in unison and in unity, and it is beautiful until it's not, until it breaks, until rebellion happens, until we as humanity said, I'm done with that. And then the separation happened. And now these things don't quite fit together, and that's the chaos of our world, isn't it? These things don't fit together, and we know that. And the people of Israel spend a lot of centuries trying to win their way back to God, trying to follow faithfully a God who says, I want you back, I want this in sync. But it just gets bumped again and again and again. And yet, there is a place where overlap happens. Where is the place? First of all, we see a conversation that Moses has. He talks to God face to face as though he's talking with a friend. We see an overlap. And then the main overlap we see in the Old Testament is where? You know me, I want you to say it. The tabernacle. Later, the temple. We see this place where overlap happens, where God says, come here, come to this place where heaven breaks through to earth. Come to this place, bring your grain offerings and your blood offerings. Come to this place where heaven cuts through and where the sync happens yet again. And then it gets better. Then Jesus comes, and he is that breaking in of the heavenly presence of God. He is God in human form, and we see that overlap. skip to Revelation, we are seeing now full overlap happening again. What a relief. What a relief to know that we can live in full sync with heaven. You might have questions about heaven. I have questions about heaven. And as I said, this won't answer all of our questions. I remember as an 11-year-old or thereabouts, I was flying as an unaccompanied minor, probably on a Qantas or TAA flight. Do you remember them? Yeah, that shows my age. So I'm on this flight as an unaccompanied minor, and all the unaccompanied minors go together so that the hosties can look after them. Ironically, they put them, it's not ironic, it's just terrible. There was a smoking section in the plane. This is totally irrelevant to the story, but there's a smoking section and the kids got put just behind the smoking section, which, I don't know, there's something wrong with that. But I was sitting next to a little boy, and I'm a very grown-up 11-year-old. He must have been about 8. We taxi off, we come up into the clouds, and then you know that feeling when you go through the clouds and you get higher and you get higher and you get higher, and this little kid turns to me and he says, "Do you think if we get any higher we'll reach heaven?" And I, in my very wise 11-year-old experience, I said, "That's not how it works." Did I know how it worked? No, I did not. Do I know how it works now? No, I do not. Not fully. I know a little more, but there's so much I don't know. There'd be so much that you don't know. This idea of streets of gold, it sounds awfully slippery to me. What is heaven like? What is heaven like? We have so many questions, and we have reached chapters 21 and 22, and I'm going to invite Raf up to read for us some verses in chapter 21, and then there'll be a pause, and then he'll read some verses from chapter 22. But in this moment, the empire has been defeated. Evil has been defeated. And so now we're going to read Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 to 5, as we catch a glimpse of what this new creation, this new heaven and new earth looks like.
Feel free to follow on in your smart device or look at the tiny screen on the stage. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away." He who was seated on the throne said, "I am making everything new." Then he said, "Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true."
Thanks, Raf. That's nepotism at work right there. Really appreciate your work. Now, that is a beautiful picture, is it not, of this, of heaven and earth in sync yet again. My understanding, all my understanding just about, of what heaven would be like, or what the end would be like, came from a very important source. Did anyone read the Left Behind series? Do you know this says all 12 books in one edition? I did not read 12 books, but I remember the impact that one book had on me. And it's one view, it's one interpretation of what's going to happen in these final days, and as we see the breaking in of a new heaven and a new earth. Now, I'm not saying Tim LaHaye said this, but this was my interpretation. One day I'll be walking along and bang, I will be in heaven. I will be in heaven forever, and this planet will be gone. What happens here doesn't matter. What happens here is irrelevant almost. As long as I've signed up to Jesus, I will be zapped up to heaven, and that's where I will spend eternity. A famous pastor in America, and I won't say his name because I'm hoping he has changed his thinking, said this in a sermon: I know who made the environment, and he's coming back and he's going to burn it all up. So yes, I drive an SUV. Okay, but that's not what Revelation is telling us. New heaven, new earth. There is a recreation. It's not an obliteration. It's a recreation. Behold, Jesus says, I am making all things new. And the rest of chapter 21 gives us images of the temple. Remember, temple is where God's presence is known. And we see measurements that actually are so symbolic, they don't actually, you can't create something out of them, of the new temple. And then it says, but there is no temple. Why is that? There's no need for a temple. How wonderful. God is here with us. God is with us. Jesus comes, God comes, they are with us, heaven and earth in sync. Now let's turn to chapter 22 and we'll read the first 5 verses of that. Thanks, Raph.
Then the angel showed me the river of the water of life, as clear as crystal, flowing from the throne of God and of the Lamb down the middle of the great sea of the city. On each side of the river stood the tree of life, bearing 12 crops of fruit, yielding its fruit every month. And then the leaves of the trees are for the healing of the nations. No longer will there be any curse. The throne of God and the Lamb of God will be in the city, and his servants will serve them. They will see his face, and his name will be on their foreheads. There will be no more night. They will not need the light of the lamp of the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light, and they will reign forever and ever.
Can't wait. I can't wait. As Alan said to us last week, we have our noses pressed up against the glass, waiting for this moment to come. This moment where heaven and earth are in sync once again. It's a city, but it has a garden in it. So it's Eden, it's a return to Eden, but it's not a return to Eden in full, because what's described is a city. And we see the tree of life there, which we saw in Eden. And we see a river flowing, and we see leaves for the healing of the nations. How much do we need healing for the nations? I used to go to a fruit shop in Epping, and it was a big fruit and vegetable shop in Epping. And I walked in one day with my then 4-year-old next to me, holding his hand. Now, something you need to know about our now 21-year-old Bay, he has always loved fruit and vegetables. Didn't like chocolate as a kid. He's come around. We've convinced him. We've worked hard on him, and he likes chocolate now, but he didn't as a kid. He loved fruit and vegetables, loves mangoes. And so as we walked into this fruit and veg shop that I went to regularly, but he'd never been to, we walked in and he just stopped dead, and I could feel his hand get, grab me. I thought, oh, what's going on? So I looked down and I said, what's wrong, mate? And his eyes were like saucers. And he looked at this sea of fruit and vegetables, which must have looked even bigger to a 4-year-old. He said, do you think this is what heaven will be like? I said, sure. I don't know. You don't know. But my gosh, it is good. That's what he looked as he saw this sea of fruit and vegetables that he probably thought were free. He saw joy. He saw fulfillment. He saw everything right in the world as he saw his blessed mangoes out on a stand. N.T. Wright has done a lot of work in this space, in this syncing of heaven and earth. So much work in helping us to understand and unpack the reality of heaven and earth in sync and overlapping again. If you can get hold of any of his writing, you don't need to buy a book necessarily. Look for something online. It's beautiful work. And I'm going to show you a quote, and it's long, so it's on the screen for you to see, but hold on, because what he says is so beautiful in this understanding of our future. He says the creation in Genesis points to the new creation. It isn't the case that the new creation is an afterthought, a plan B once the first plan had gone so terribly wrong. Human sin has meant that God's eventual design has had to be arrived at by a long, winding, and often tear-stained and blood-spattered route. The most important tears and bloodstains being from God himself in the person of the Lamb, who is Jesus. But as the triumphant conclusion of Exodus, so with Revelation, the goal is achieved by the power of sheer mercy and grace. The mercy and grace through which creation is not abolished, but fulfilled. Not thrown away and replaced, but renewed from top to bottom. That's what we have to look forward to. A sinking of heaven and earth. Eugene Peterson says it this way: the biblical vision of the future is not an escape from reality as we know it, it's a remaking of reality as we know it. So no, God is not going to burn it all up. What we do now matters. Behold, Jesus said, I am making all things new. Not I made them all new, not I will make them all new. Behold, I am making all things new. So we don't know exactly what that will look like. We have hints that Raph has read to us. We have hints and pictures and symbols, not just in Revelation, but all throughout our scriptures. And what we get is a hint. We know some of what won't be there, and we know some of what will be there. What won't be there? No sea. Don't worry if you're a surfer. This does not mean no big bodies of water and no ocean. If we've been following along, if we're playing along at home, this is no chaos. The sea equals chaos. There will be no chaos in this blending of heaven and earth. No death, no tears, no crying, no pain. You know what that means? No aging bodies. No need for wheelchairs. No broken relationships. No greed. They are all pushed out of this new heaven and new earth. No temple, which we've talked about. No closed gates. These beautiful gates are vividly described, but they're not closed. There's no need. There's no need for self-protection. There's no need for community protection. There's no curse. There's no need for a sun and a moon. Doesn't mean they won't be there, but there's no need for them because God will be our light. He will be with us. And that's the flip side. What is there? We know what isn't there. What is there? God will be there. Or rather, should I say here? God will be there here. This is the part we can't quite grab hold of in full, but God will be there here. His glory, his people will be here. Creativity will be here. Dallas Willard says, we won't be sitting around looking at one another or at God for eternity, but we will join the eternal Logos. We will join with Jesus. We will reign with him in the endlessly ongoing creative work of God. Willard suggests that we think about a town or a city or a suburb here and now, and to wonder and to think, what would I do if I was in charge of that city, that suburb, your street? What would you do if you were in charge? How would heaven break into earth now if you were in charge? And he said, practice what the new heaven and new earth will be like. See that breaking in of the kingdom. Practice what it's like. How would you bring justice? How would you bring love? How would you bring provision? How would you bring salvation to that street, town, city where you live? Bring heaven to earth now. What does this mean for us now? Apart from practicing what it might be like, because we know that no one's going to put us in charge of London right now. We know that. But what does it mean for us now? We talked about the fact that the breaking in, the overlap of heaven, come on, get coordinated. The overlap of heaven and earth happened where? In the tabernacle and then later the temple. We saw God come in. We saw heaven come down. We saw God at work in the Holy of Holies and in the temple. And then we saw the kingdom come. We saw God's presence through Jesus on earth when he was here. And eventually, we've talked about this sinking, this overlap will happen in the end. But what about now? What about right now? Where is God breaking in his kingdom right now? This is extraordinary. We know this. You can logically tell me right now, can't you? The way and the means is extraordinary, because I don't know I would ever put this much trust in me. But the breaking in of God's kingdom, the place that heaven can be found on earth right now, is through you and you and you and me. It's through anyone who has decided to follow Jesus and accept that forgiveness. That blows me away, because I wouldn't put that much trust in me. And yet this is God's plan. And we have to accept that his plan is good. And if we stop and we think, there is so much breaking in of the kingdom. There is so much breaking in of goodness and mercy and salvation on earth right now. We get caught in the chaos and the difficult times and our own sin, but actually we do see God's kingdom breaking in regularly here on earth. 1 Corinthians 6 tells us we are temples of the Holy Spirit. Temple is not used accidentally. What used to be only seen in the temple and the Holy of Holies now is seen in me. Most days I wake up and I don't sense any great heavenly work happening in and through me. But God does work through me. He does work through you. He is working in this place all of the time. Behold, Jesus says, I am making all things new through you, through us. And I guess the question is, and this is not to promote guilt, this is to inspire us, how can we make more room for heaven in here? The more we follow earth, the less room there is for heaven. And this is the message of Revelation, isn't it? Be patient, hold on, endure, and stay faithful to heaven, to God's presence. We know that this is God's plan for now, to use us for the breaking in of his kingdom. How do we see it right now? I see it when I watch people come into New Hope Community Care. Ask Phil or Lance or Hannah, any of the volunteers who work in that space, where do you see God's kingdom breaking out there? They'll be able to give you some stories. Some people who find themselves on the fringes or find themselves in need, and they come in and they find hope, they find provision, they're prayed for. Some come to faith. This is an incredible work. We see the kingdom breaking through. We see Jesus making all things new through our prayer team that meets during the week, that meets here and ministers to people after the service. You can be a part of that. Join in half an hour before the service. Watch God's kingdom break through from all of what earth is doing, breaking through in this overlap of heaven and earth. I had an example this week. 2 days ago, I was at an ordination retreat, and there was a real tangible sense of heaven breaking into earth. What we did, the guy who was leading us said, I want you to get into your heart language group. Everyone speaks English, but what's your heart language? So everyone kind of divided up, and we read the Lord's Prayer in 13 different languages. That's ordination. It's this multicultural melting pot that has been such a joy to be a part of. But in that moment, hearing the Lord's Prayer in Mandarin and Arabic, in Chin and Quran, hearing the Lord's Prayer in different languages, I just caught a glimpse of heaven on earth as we prayed for God's kingdom to come in 13 different languages. But it doesn't need to be complicated. Heaven breaks through when you sit in a coffee shop and show kindness to the person in front of you. Heaven breaks through, an overlap of heaven and earth happens when you're having a conversation at work and someone says, what did you do on the weekend? I went to church. Church is a place where I spiritually connect with God and I love it. You don't know what impact that might have. It's not even our business, that's God's business. But that overlap and that breaking in happens in simple ways and in more complicated ways. Prison Network has this amazing plan for women coming out of prison to be able to access a rental property. Can you imagine how hard it is, because it's already hard to get a rental property, can you imagine how hard it is when you have to acknowledge that you've been in prison? So Prison Network says if you've got a rental property, would you be able to give it up? You're still paid full rent, but would you take the risk of allowing a woman coming out of prison to get a leg up so she and possibly her family can have a safe place to live? That's heaven breaking through. That's Jesus making all things new through you. We could spend the morning talking about opportunities for heaven and earth to overlap, for Jesus to make all things new. There are so many ways. Raph was driving in Seymour. No, it wasn't Seymour. He corrected me. I can't remember. It was a suburb of Melbourne, not Seymour at all. And he was on his way from somewhere to somewhere, and as he's going through this particular suburb, he drove through a roundabout, and in the middle of the roundabout, like in the centre of the roundabout, is a kid sitting there, upset, crying. If there's anything you know about Raph, you'll learn very quickly he will never pass that by. And so he pulls over, hops out of his car. How awkward is this conversation? 50-year-old man going up to a probably 10-year-old boy, crying in the middle of a roundabout and trying to have a conversation to make sure he's okay. Much easier to drive on. Much easier to just keep going and let earth have its way. But he didn't. He asked the kid if he was okay. Not really. Can I call your parents? No. Can you go home? I don't want to go home. And Raph remembers distinctly what it feels like to not be able to go home. And so in that moment, in just the smallest of ways, he was able to say, that was me. I was you. It didn't feel safe to go home. But I can tell you, here I am. It got better. It got better. And that's all he could do. He got in his car, he called the police and said, please check on this boy, and they did. But in that moment, it was just a tiny piece of heaven breaking through to earth, saying this chaos is not okay. And I want God to use me in small, sometimes what feels like insignificant ways to bring heaven to earth. Because if this overlap of heaven and earth has come and is coming, it all matters. It does, it all matters. Every kid matters. The environment matters. Your relationships matter. Your morality matters. What you do with your money, what you do with your body matters. You radically forgiving others matters. It is making all things new through us. Will you surrender yourself to be more full of heaven, to be more ready and willing to have heaven break in through you and out into the world? Do you want people to see heaven when they see you? I do. And I'm a work in progress. Some days I go, I think God used me today. Most days I go, But I trust and I surrender, and I know you do too. It's probably happening even when you don't know it. It might be for you a simple matter of, I want to give more money to something that's going to be of eternal significance. For you it might be, do you know what? I want to be a foster carer. Do you know the rate of kids needing foster care has gone up and the rate of foster carers has gone down? Maybe you're part of filling that gap. Or maybe you're not, but maybe you can do Kids Hope down at Kerrymuir. Talk to Peter this morning. There are a multitude of ways we can be used by God to break heaven into earth now, as we have our noses pressed up to the glass, waiting for the full overlapping of heaven and earth. We can see it in part right now. As the band comes back on, I would love for us to spend a minute. It's not a lot of time, but 1 minute before God, asking him the question, how can I have more heaven in me? What is it that you want me to surrender? Or what is it that you want me to do? What is it that you don't want me to do? Just in this vulnerable moment where you allow God to speak and we can see more of heaven breaking through into earth. Behold, Jesus said, I am making all things new through you. Let's spend a minute in reflection before we sing.